end of life. If you have a magnet rate, most of the pacemakers will have a particular fixed magnet rate, but that gets altered and comes down. We now don't have a mini clinic, but a mini clinic is something which tells you about the pulse width. If the pulse width has progressed, then you will realize it's end of life, and sometimes there will be complete no spike seen altogether because the battery is completely depleted. Let me quickly show you a couple of examples more, and this was a patient where these T inversions come up, and this patient actually has received a pacemaker earlier. So now, what is the reason of T wave inversion in a patient who has a pacemaker implanted? And in fact, in this ECG, you're seeing that there is no pacing effect. So what's the story? Had a VVI pacemaker, pacing was constantly being performed at 70 beats a minute. The lower rate was decreased to 50, and this is the ECG sheen. And then you can correlate very well. What is this T wave change? Memory sign, nothing but memory sign, because he was pacing the ventricle all the time, and you have a secondary STT change because of that, and now you are promoting intrinsic conduction, you are going down to 50 rate, you have an intrinsic rate which is more than 50, and therefore you see these T wave changes. Not pathological, not suggestive of ischemia. This patient is not complaining of chest pain, purely a memory sign. Sometimes you see an ECG where you have this group beating kind of a thing happening, whether is this pacemaker malfunction. More often than not, you need to see a little carefully. You see the P wave being tracked in the first three complexes, and in fact there is one more P wave in the T here which is not being tracked. So there is a P wave here which is not being tracked. Upper rate behavior. So often the pacemaker not only has a lower rate but an upper rate also. In dual chamber pacemakers, it will not allow to track beyond the upper rate. So this is a normal functioning and upper rate behavior. Let me show you quickly an example of an elderly lady who had been implanted for a complete heart block. This is the pacemaker seen. 6 months later, comes back with a complete AV block. What's happening here? Obviously no pacing happening, so you definitely want to see the X-ray. And what does the X-ray show? Where is the pacemaker? No pacemaker. Where are you lost? Well, I'm cheating because I'm not showing you the entire thing. There is the pacemaker. So the pacemaker was very well there, but the pacing lead in a Twiddler syndrome, it has retracted back into the pocket itself. So you can swear and say that the pacemaker was definitely implanted, not that it was not implanted, but it had dislodged, the lead had dislodged in the pocket itself. We have seen many of these examples, and somebody who can pick this up, I would really appreciate this. Lady who had a pacemaker implanted 3 years ago and been functioning very well for complete heart block, and now comes with syncope. What do you suspect? You suspect this is a pacemaker malfunction, postural hypertension. We said that syncope, it's not likely to be any neurological event as such, but ventricular tachycardia. Now this patient had a normal LV function, it's less likely there is ventricular tachycardia. Going into the history, looking at the ECG carefully is important. I know it is difficult to diagnose, but can you see in this lead, what is the QT interval? The QT interval looks long, especially this patient. Underlying rhythm is atrial fibrillation. In AFib, again, identifying QT is a problem, but then while the patient is being monitored, we can see this polymorphic VT run, and it was this PVC is giving rise to Torsad. And then you asked, the general practitioner had given sparfloxacin for some respiratory tract infection. So time and again, showing you these kind of examples, looking at the QT, avoiding ofloxacin kind of drugs is important. I think I'll stop with this last example. Again, an interesting patient who had a pacemaker implanted for LV dysfunction. So this is now a biventricular pacemaker, advanced form of pacemaker, but the message here is important. So let me share it with you. The pacemaker has been programmed at 50 beats a minute. Gentleman had had this pacemaker for a couple of years, was doing well. Suddenly comes with severe fatigue, nausea and cramps. You take this ECG, can't see pacing spike, but you realize the heart rate is 53, so maybe the pacemaker is sensing. The first thing to do, I'll just take a minute. The first thing to do is probably do a magnet mode or try to increase the pacing rate. When the pacing rate was increased, you find that the ventricular capture is already there. So ventricle is capturing, but the QR is pretty wide. You have in V1 an RBBB-like effect telling you that it's a left ventricular pacing also happening. So it's a biventricular pacemaker. But what about the P waves? No P waves. Any clue what is this? What does the ECG show? Anybody? Well, that's where what investigation, probably you'll do all of them, but which is the first one to do when you look at bizarre QRS complex like this? Hyperkalemia, very good. So these patients, heart failure, often on diuretics, ACE inhibitors, potassium comes out to be 6.8. You treat the hyperkalemia, you start getting a proper P wave coming up as the hyperkalemia gets corrected, and as you have a normalization of the potassium, you see that biventricular capture happens and the QRS is remarkably narrowed down. Thank you very much for your patient listening.
Excellent presentation, Dr. Vora.
Right. So this is a common question. A pacemaker patient needs to undergo surgery. What kind of guidance and precautions which you'll say? As far as the pacemaker is concerned, use of cautery is the main problem during any surgical procedure. So it's often in those patients who are pacemaker dependent all the time, it might be relevant to change the pacing mode into a non-sensing mode. So VO or a DO mode by using a magnet probably is one of the safest thing, but you need to do the ECG monitoring of these patients while the surgery is being done. Guiding the surgeon and the anesthetist that preferably use a bipolar cautery, use the indifferent patch as far away from the pacemaker is also advisable. Using intermittent cautery rather than a continuous cautery, all this would avoid sensing by the pacemaker circuitry. Now those patients who are not dependent on the pacemaker, probably it's a less of an issue or a concern, but it would be important to have an ECG monitoring and these general guidelines to be followed by the surgeon.
Thank you, sir. I now request Dr. Prashant to felicitate the speaker, Dr. Amit Vora. I request Dr. Amit Vora to kindly hand over the certificates to the chairpersons.
The next topic will be chaired by Dr. H. Prabhakar, cardiologist at Father Medical College, Mangalore, Dr. R.N. Bhatt, consultant physician from Udupi, Dr. Yogesh, assistant professor at Father Medical College, Mangalore. I invite the chairpersons to kindly take their seats. The topic for this session is ventricular ectopics, to treat or not to treat, by Dr. Rajpal Singh. I welcome you, sir, onto the dais. I request the chairpersons to introduce the speaker, Dr. Rajpal Singh.
Good morning to everybody. Now let me introduce Dr. Rajpal Singh. He is MRCP from UK. He is the member of European Society of Cardiology, and he had an intervention fellowship in 2005 to 2006. And he is ex-consultant cardiologist and Wockhardt Hospital, Bangalore. And he had an intervention fellowship in 2005 to 2006. And he is ex-consultant cardiologist and Wockhardt Hospital, Bangalore. At present, he is the consultant cardiologist at Scott's Hospital, Banerghatta, Bangalore. With this short information, I request Dr. Rajpal Singh to go ahead with the talk.
Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, and I thank the organizers for inviting me to give this talk. I'm afraid my talk won't be that colorful and full of ECGs and stuff as Dr. Vora's talk, because this is something which is more of looking at what things need to be done and how to pick these up and when to refer and when not to treat. So I just go through the incidence, the prevalence, the risk factors that we identify with it. We'll just talk a few words about the specific types that one needs to look at, work through the investigations, and then suggest a management approach. So if there's any questions, feel free to speak at any point. Now, ventricular ectopics, this is pretty much common, and I think all of us see this on a regular basis. I see it on every Saturday, particularly in Bangalore. On the IT crowd, I've got the weekend off. I usually have about 2 or 3 young chaps coming in with having had missed beats, a few runs of beats, and all these things. So it just is easy time to sit and chat and probably earn some easy money as well. They're largely asymptomatic, and it really is of relevance if the patient has got any history of cardiac disease or LV dysfunction and those kind of things. And we know that we should always have this caveat in mind that we should not be trigger happy to start treating these patients with medications, because overtreatment with antiarrhythmic drugs has been shown to have significant impact, in fact cause more sustained ventricular arrhythmias, which may be of more relevance. A little bit of history. Now this is this kind of ectopics was first described by a Chinese physician in 600 BC. He's a very astute clinician who made the observation that irregularities in the pulse, which come infrequently, do not have any impact on the longevity. However, if those happen to be more frequent, they tend to have a more ominous sign. We also know that Levin and colleagues in 1965 classified and graded ventricular ectopics based upon the severity and came up with the conclusion that the more severe the symptoms, the higher the risk of developing sustained or malignant ventricular ectopics. Now this led to the belief that we should be treating every ventricular ectopic with medications, and this went on for a period of time until the findings of the CAST study came out in 1989, I think it was 89. This was a placebo-controlled randomized trial looking at post-infarct patients who had ventricular ectopics, working on the hypothesis that suppressing these ventricular ectopics would reduce the incidence of malignant ventricular arrhythmias. It was proven to the contrary that class 1C drugs such as flecainide and so actually were more pro-arrhythmic rather than the placebo drugs, and that hypothesis came to an end, and we then saw a reduction in the use of these kind of drugs. If you look at the general population, about 1% of people of a normal population, what is perceived as a normal population, will have a ventricular ectopic when you do a 12-lead ECG. If you take it further by doing prolonged monitoring, be either by a 24-hour Holter or a 48-hour Holter, you would find a sizable proportion, about 40 to 70% of these patients having had ventricular ectopics of some sort. Now these studies were criticized on the grounds that there was no assessment of or no accurate way of saying that all these patients actually had normal hearts, and so this was flawed. Subsequently, Dr. Corsi and colleagues did a very elegant assessment of doing both a right heart and a left heart catheterization, picking up these patients who are supposedly who had normal right and left heart studies, and did Holter monitorings, and showed that even in this group of patients who are very well selected, picked up, about 40% did have ventricular ectopics. And you would find that in about 4% or so, they even had more multifocal ventricular ectopics, which is a bit more worrying. So these are the kind of things that has been found. So if you see patients with ventricular ectopics, it is not unduly worrying. It is some time to take a step back, look at their history, and see what else needs to be done. And we all know that this kind of ectopics increases with age. As you get older, you've got more prevalence of hypertension, you may have left ventricular hypertrophy, there may be silent ischemia, so ventricular ectopics can increase with age and time. As I mentioned already, frequent and multifocal ventricular ectopics, you can see it in about 1 to 4% of the healthy population. There has been other studies that has been done about multifocal ventricular ectopics, particularly Canadian groups showed that in patients who've got a good left ventricular function, it does have a benign prognosis. However, in other studies, longitudinal studies which is looked at, like the Mr. Fit study, it was shown that presence of ventricular ectopics had a higher incidence of cardiovascular death. And this again, when you look at the Framingham study group also, it was shown that the more the ventricular ectopics, the higher the incidence, or at least twice the higher incidence of all-cause cardiovascular mortality. So one does not need to work with the assumption that, look, thing that we see is benign, so have that in mind that there may be things that we need to do. If you look at the risk factors as to what brings about ventricular ectopics, well, increasing age, as we've already spoken, ischemia, hypertension, left ventricular hypertrophy, electrolyte abnormalities more common. Hypertension. Now, uncontrolled hypertension does also lead to ventricular ectopics, probably just by the impact of having a higher pressure volume and stretch. Left ventricular hypertrophy, we have got data which suggests that those patients who have got left ventricular hypertrophy diagnosed on ECG criteria do have a higher incidence of ventricular ectopics. Caffeine intake is an interesting one. Now, we all recommend whenever we've seen patients with palpitations and ectopics that they need to cut down on their caffeine intake, alcohol intake, but really there isn't any human data to support that. There is animal data that it does affect the repolarization potentials, but in terms of human data, there is not much. There's been elegant electrophysiological studies that have been done that those who've got modest amounts of intake of caffeine do not have any increased incidence. In fact, there is a very nice study which was based upon what is described as a hygienic regime, wherein you don't take any alcohol, you don't smoke, you reduce your caffeine intake, you've got a preconditioned exercise pattern, and it's been shown that even in these studies that the ventricular ectopic incidence was not reduced. So coffee in modest amounts is fine. The data suggests that if you drink more than 9 cups of coffee a day, then you probably do bring about a few ectopics. Sleep apnea is another thing that we know about. We know that patients who've got sleep apnea have got higher incidence of nocturnal cardiac arrhythmias. This could be anything between non-sustained VT, ventricular ectopics, sinus pauses, and so on. And the mechanism for this is quite varied. It may be the primary cause of hypoxia and hypercapnia, or maybe as a consequence of having had sleep apnea for a period of time in terms of having developed hypertension, both systemic or pulmonary hypertension. So these are the salient things that one needs to keep in mind when you see a patient with ventricular ectopics. The other thing that comes up is exercise, and exercise is a very good tool that you can use to prognosticate your patients. We know that exercise, ectopics that suppress with exercise do carry a benign and good prognosis. However, ectopics that increase with exercise, or that those which come more pronounced during recovery, do have data which suggests that they've got an increased risk of cardiovascular mortality. There's a very nice study which was published in the New England Journal in 2000, which had 8 asymptomatic French individuals who had ventricular ectopics. It was about more than 30 ventricular ectopics over a period of time, which was of about 10%. If they had more than 10%, these patients were longitudinally followed up, and it was a 23-year follow-up, and it was seen that about 2.6% increased risk of cardiovascular mortality in these patients. So these are not necessarily benign, particularly so the ones which come on during recovery. And it's worthwhile remembering that if they get more than 7 ventricular ectopics during recovery in a minute, it is shown to be an independent predictor of cardiovascular disease. The other rare thing that we all occasionally come across is catecholinergic polymorphic tachycardia. This is usually seen after exercise, and the classic history your patients would give is they would have cycled to work, a vigorous period of cycling, and they're just in the changing room changing their clothes, and you would find they would have had a syncopal episode. These are the kind of classic symptoms that people would describe. And when you get this kind of history, make sure that your exercise test has got more prolonged recovery phase, because it is in this recovery phase that patients would manifest their ventricular arrhythmias, not the conventional post-ischemic TMTs wherein you stop in about 5 minutes. The ones which really need to be looked at are right ventricular tachycardia, right ventricular ectopics. Basically, you can differentiate the two very well. Most of the right ventricular ectopics have got every right ventricular ectopic has got a left bundle branch block pattern. Anything which arises from the left ventricle has got a right bundle branch block pattern. And the ones which we need to really look at as to what needs to be done are the right ventricular ectopics. These have got a characteristic pattern. They have an inferior axis and a left bundle branch block on their ECGs. They are exercise induced. They are more commonly seen in women, and it usually appears within the 2nd and 4th decade. The hallmark about this is that these patients have got normal left ventricular function, and thereby these patients have got an excellent prognosis. And if the symptoms are more frequent, and generally the cutoff one takes is on a Holter of more than 10% of the beats, we feel that If it is more than 10%, it can have a long-term impact on the left ventricular function. So if it is not settling down with the antiarrhythmic drugs, simple antiarrhythmic drugs such as beta blockers, then these ectopics are very easily amenable to ablation therapy and can be curative. Maybe not, if not curative, certainly would reduce the burden of ventricular ectopics. The other thing to remember is arrhythmogenic right ventricular dysplasia. This is certainly something which needs to be addressed quite carefully. These are patients who do not have normal structurally normal hearts. In contrast, they may have ectopics which very much mimic, but the hallmark is that they do not have normal structures of the heart. Echocardiography, you can see an increased right ventricular free wall thickness. There may be some changes in the echo density, but the diagnostic criteria one uses is the cardiac MRI. There is clear abnormalities on these. This has got a poor prognosis, particularly with ablation. The results are not very good. And once you diagnose these patients are at high risk of sudden death, and they would be candidates for primary prevention with an ICD implant. So you need to think about these patients. A rare cause is, as I said earlier explained, the catecholaminergic polymorphic ventricular tachycardia. They've got a characteristic history. It's because of a mutation which leads to changes in the calcium channels. And again, they have exercise-induced ventricular ectopics which can degenerate into polymorphic VT. So do have a prolonged recovery phase. And again, these patients do respond to beta blockers, but you should be offering them an implantable defibrillator as well. So having heard about what are the kind of things, then the key thing is to have a detailed history before you go down the path of diagnosing all these. And the characteristic history as patients would present is those of missed beats, feeling like there is a thump in the middle of the night. It's worthwhile listening to this story and assessing the frequency and severity of these symptoms. I think by doing so, you'll be able to identify what mode of monitoring you could do, whether this is something which can be picked up with an ECG, whether you need a 24-hour Holter, a 48-hour Holter, or an external loop recorder, which is for about 7 days, or an implantable loop recorder, or whether you need to do other things. Always be concerned about patients who do report an associated syncopal or pre-syncopal episodes. It's unlikely to be benign. And you look at the trigger factors. Exercise can be one of those. And do take a history about